Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is Yukitsu Times, and welcome to my channel. This is the second set for the Rise of the Samurai mini tournament being held over on the Something Awful forums. This is my second opponent, Sydin. He's playing as the Kubota Fujiwara, I'm playing as the Kamakura Minamoto. Let's just quickly go over our armies before we start talking about strategy a little bit. I've got 2 mounted samurai, I've got 3 Naginata warrior monks, my Naginata warrior monk heroes, my general's bodyguard, my sword attendants, and my Naginata levy. My opponent has got 1 bow attendant, 2 foot samurai, 4 Naginata warrior monks, his Tetsubo warrior monk heroes, and his general's bodyguard. Now, my general strategy in this one, and every strategy that you make should sort of assume a little bit about what your opponent's going to do, but my strategy in this particular one was to start by harassing with my mounted samurai while my infantry moved up into position. I wanted to be able to capture the sword dojo, and I wanted to be able to contest the shrine at the center here. So to do that, I've got my levy over there, I've got my sword attendants very rapidly moving to control the shrine, I've got my mounted samurai obviously skirmishing over here, and basically what I want to do is be able to fight in and around these trees. The reason for that being that I know that Sydin likes to take these foot samurai. Foot samurai are a very powerful unit, and they're the best ranged unit in Rise of the Samurai, were it not for their small unit numbers. They only come with about 60 men, whereas this unit came with 80, for example. Which means that he has the ability to completely hammer my line with arrows if I am out in the open. So staying in this forest, which is what I'm doing with these units, will prevent him from causing significant casualties with his ranged complement. If he hadn't taken that, I would have been much more willing to fight out in the open, but since he has met my expectations by taking the bow attendants and these 2 foot samurai, I'm pretty happy with continuing on with that particular part of the strategy. But here's where I'm going to start talking about flexibility here. Now, generally when I make a strategy, which is to say I wanted to move up all of my infantry into a block here, I wanted to have all of my infantry prepared to take all of his infantry head on, flank around with my Naginata levy, and come around from the backside with my mounted samurai. That was the strategy that I had wanted to do. However, he's making that impossible to do, but at the same time, he's making a bit of a mistake. And what I want to say about making a plan is, I want to assume that my opponent is going to make the strongest move possible with his army when I make my plan. In that case, the strongest move possible for Sydin is to have his Tetsubo warrior monk heroes up in front here instead of way back here. He needs to have 3 of his Naginata warrior monks line up here rather than spread out across his front. He needs at least 2 archer units here to try and entice me out of the woods into flat, even ground for his Tetsubo warrior monks to get a good charge. He needs 1 unit of Naginata warrior monks close into his main line, facing the other direction, ready to check my cavalry, and then having another foot samurai and his possibly his bow attendants keeping my cavalry honest by shooting at them if I try and skirmish. That's pretty much the optimal way to deal with the sort of army that I have brought. Would have let him forced me into an open field, would have let him do a direct charge against my unit's full front with the units that need to be there, and we would have been on relatively even numbers until he brought in the foot samurai, which would have swung the battle slightly in his favor. Now, instead what he's done is he's checked my cavalry. Now, my cavalry can't move around the back safely, and they can't skirmish safely because his archers have moved forward. But he's also tied up a huge amount of his resources in keeping my cavalry away from the rear of his army. So, in this particular case, my plan hasn't actually worked. I can't enact my plan as I desire because I can't get this cavalry behind him. But on the other hand, my opponent's made a mistake. And it's one of those sort of situations where, like, it sounds a bit harsh to say that someone made a mistake, or it sounds a bit arrogant. But there are specific cases where it becomes clear that you've done something wrong in retrospect, and this is one of them. And the thing about a mistake as compared to a perfect play is that when my opponent makes a mistake, I can react to it. As you can see, I've started to sort of move my infantry up forward. I want to get into a good position before I do my charge. And the thing is that I'm perfectly willing in this particular case to just outright charge his infantry, overwhelm them, and destroy them. But first I'm going to get off some arrows while my units move in position. There's no reason not to. And at this point I'm sort of assessing the situation. His Tetsubo warrior monk heroes are still far back. but they will be there relatively in time. He's moving more of his forces over there, but he's still got a ton of forces that are expensive clumped up over here. So I still can't really get around the backside or the flank, but I'm still going to be at a tremendous advantage in melee at this side, especially because I've got that shrine, and my Naginata Levy can now contribute to the fight by getting around here, trying to get his general, trying to get his archers, trying to get flanking bonuses. So in this particular case, I'm able to adapt to the situation. I'm able to look at the situation and react to it as though I had planned this all along, even though I didn't. So since my opponent has made the error, I can exploit that by being flexible, but at the same time, I didn't rely on him making this mistake. So if my opponent had played perfectly, it would have fallen into my particular plan, which is to say, getting through this forest and fighting him on my terms. Instead, as you can see, he's only got 3 non-hero Naginata warrior monks over here, and they're already wavering because I've got the full brunt of my army here. I've got my heroes, I've got Warcry. The whistling arrows were actually his. I'm not sure if he was aware that they affect both friendly and enemy units, but they do. I think he may have figured that it would slow down the progress of the battle since it reduces statistics on both sides, but in this particular case it bit him. It wouldn't have made too much of a difference. I think it's only -1 to morale. But as you can see, at this point my opponent has finally moved his final Naginata warrior monk unit into melee here, but it's too late now. This gives me the opportunity to exploit what I had initially wanted to, get into melee with his archers around the backside. I could have pushed through into the round of the back of his main melee line, but his main melee line is basically gone. So this is just to sort of go to show that if your opponent makes mistakes, you can win by exploiting those, but never assume that your opponent is going to make those mistakes when you're making a plan. When you make your plan, you should assume optimal play or what you believe is optimal play. Obviously, that's not necessarily going to be the case. That's what you assume because your idea of what optimal play is may differ from what actual optimal play is, but as close as you can. So, in this particular case, Sydin made an error. It ruined my plan, but I was adaptable enough to use that error in my favor. And if he had done everything perfectly, I believe I still could have won it. It would have been much more difficult, but I believe that if he had lined up where I had wanted him to, given the information he would have had, he would have either had to have seceded the morale dojo to me, let me skirmish for longer, or committed to an attack on terms that I wanted to dictate. And that's simply the advantage that I had given that I had cavalry in that particular match. Anyway, let's get to the stats screen. We'll take a look at how our units did. It's always a good idea after battles like these to sort of go over how your units did, and that way you'll know which ones are performing on par for their money and which ones you might want to consider removing or which ones you just feel you used poorly. So, by no means was Sydin playing like ridiculously poorly in this match. He is actually a fairly good player. In this particular case, it was because I watched his matches coming into this, and I think I sort of had his number. I kind of knew exactly what he was all about, how to beat him. Another thing was I huddled near the buildings in all our matches, and that's something I noticed was a sort of weakness of his, and that's sort of what I assessed was going to be a weakness of his from his playstyle. It's not really something you should rely on. Anyway, as you can see, my general got 54 kills, which is abnormal for my generals. He pushed into melee when he wouldn't stand and fight, and I think that's where he got a lot of his kills, chopping down retreating people. My sword attendants got 69 kills. Considering they were chopping at monks, that is very economic. My Naginata Levy got 70 kills, but I know for a fact they were running down fleeing troops. My Naginata warrior monks, this one was the one that swung around the flank of the building, trying to get around the sides and the back, and they got there, but they were a little bit late, so they didn't get to as much of the party. My 2 frontline units of Naginata warrior monks both did exceptional amounts of work against an equal unit, so I know that these scores are a result of them running down fleeing units mostly. Their low number of deaths, however, is mostly because I was able to position them correctly. My mounted samurai were both absolute beasts this match, 81 kills, 72 kills, and they are an exceptional value when you know how to use them correctly. They got lots of foot samurai, they were running down very expensive units, they shot a lot of monks. a very good value for what they were able to do, but you have to be able to handle them correctly. They're one of those units that can sort of get away from you and do very little damage if you use them incorrectly. My Naginata Warrior Monk heroes, they got 48 kills, but I mostly brought them there for moral support, so that's not too disappointing for me. Looking over my opponent's army, his general got fewer kills. That's sort of to be expected. Generals tend to get a lot of kills when your army is getting a lot of kills. His Tetsubo Warrior Monk hero, he held them in reserve. That's a mistake with Tetsubo Warrior Monks. They should be leading the charge, or they should be going around the flank. So they were into the party a little bit too late, and they only got 26 kills. His Foot Samurai, both of them did fairly okay, but they also got destroyed, which is very, very poor with Foot Samurai. They're an expensive unit. They're supposed to be able to get a lot of kills before they die, so this is a little bit bad for the Foot Samurai. Here, we can get to the main difference between our performances, and that's in the Naginata Warrior Monks. His mostly got completely wiped out without causing very many kills, and that's because he sent them in sort of piecemeal, without much support. And he let them rout and get run down, and then rally and then get run down again. So that doesn't present them very many opportunities to get a lot of kills, which is what they're really there for. That's sort of what their specialty should be, grinding through the enemy. Lastly, Bow Tenants. Bow Tenants did okay for what they honestly are. They're usually a meat shield sort of unit. They're supposed to be able to sort of fend off cavalry from picking at your army for free. So they did pretty much as expected. They're fairly low-cost unit. They're not terribly low-cost, but they're relatively efficient for their job, and they can get in a shooting match if your opponent tries to take too much shooting. So anyway, that was round 1. Let's move on to round 2.